Hey there, Maggie. So Eric and I are making screencast videos as our way to give students some feedback on how the drafting process is going, let you know where you're on track, and then give you some ideas of how you can take this essay up to the next level with some revision. And so great job getting in a promising first draft. One of the things I'm so impressed with in this essay is how thoroughly you seem to be understanding the material in chapter 3, and your mastery of this material really shines because not only are you including a certain number of sources, those sources are really talking to each other. So when you talk about Maslow, you weave in Socrates. When you talk about Socrates, you pull in Mischel. And so it really just shows how you're able to how you're so adept at just drawing these significant connections. Sometimes what we see is this kind of disjointed writing in this essay where people will pull in sources, but they don't necessarily see how those sources closely connect to one another. And so it's really great to see your thinking at such a high level. So I think you are absolutely on the right track with this essay. I think this is a very strong first draft. And what's exciting about having a strong first draft to look at is that I can give you some very specific suggestions on how to kind of work on the sentence level and get this draft to the next level. And so a couple of the things I want to advise you on in this draft are I want to talk about some organizational changes, just some little things that you might consider moving around. And then I want to also help you think about connecting some of these ideas more concretely back to Jake's situation. So those are sort of two of the big takeaways. But I'm going to walk through paragraph by paragraph, and you can feel free to pause this as I'm talking and take notes or do whatever, use it however it works best for you. So looking at this first paragraph, what I really loved about it was just the tone that you establish, that you're being friendly and professional, and that you're really listening to Jake and you're taking his situation seriously. So you present what we call in rhetoric a really strong ethos, a really great character. So you're coming across as somebody who seems trustworthy and caring and somebody that Jake is going to want to listen to. And so that tone is working really well at the beginning. I also thought that you did a great job in this last sentence here previewing not necessarily the stance that you're going to take yet. So it's not really a thesis in that sense in terms of taking a position, but you're previewing the direction of your essay by saying, Jake, we're going to explore your situation by using Socrates. And I think that that sets up the essay quite nicely. So moving into this first body paragraph, I think that things are working really well. I would suggest maybe cutting this little piece off of the first paragraph, actually this piece, because it almost seems like an aside, like a by the way or something like that. And it's really not necessary, and it may confuse Jake because Socrates talked about eudaimonia, he talked about flourishing. Some people may see that as synonymous for happiness. And so we start to split hairs when we're talking about, well, what is happiness? And that just may pull Jake a little off course from the focus that you want him to take. So this section that's highlighted in blue here, I would say you can go ahead and cut that, and you would probably make things less confusing for Jake, and you wouldn't lose anything. So I think this would be a strong starter sentence. Socrates' idea of the good life was someone who is moral and self-actualized. I think that works really well. And then you can move right into Socrates created a metaphor to help show us how to think about the good life, a charioteer with two horses. In this analogy, the charioteer is our reason and the horses are our desire and willpower. Okay, so my other suggestion is that I think this would be a good place to develop that metaphor a little bit further. And I know you really do a deep dive into it in some of the body paragraphs, but it seems like you're just getting going here, and Jake might need another sentence or two. So maybe just telling us the charioteers are reason, as you did, the horses are desires and willpower. Maybe just take it a step further. The black horse represents our desires or our appetites, those things that appeal to us in a really kind of primitive way, those things that kind of pull us in a direction of just addressing our wants, those things that we want, like the marshmallow or whatever it is that sounds good to us in that moment. But then that the white horse is this thing called willpower, and the willpower keeps us from overindulging in those appetites all the time. And the three of these things work together to keep us on course. So you don't have to include a ton, but I just think a few more sentences there are going to help set up the rest of your essay. It's going to just flesh it out and help set the stage a little bit more. So then I think once you do that, you can move into, if we think about the good life in this way, becoming self-actualized and being moral through the charioteer and the two horses, then Socrates would say you should go to nursing school and pursue a job that would help attain the good life. That's absolutely true. I think you can get rid of this phrase here, I think that, because you are 100% right. Socrates would say that. And remember, you're the ethics guru, so you don't have to hedge here or take guesses. I would just use that strong language and get rid of the I think that and just be very clear. Socrates would say that you should go to nursing school and pursue a job that will help attain the good life. That's a very strong statement, so I would suggest leaving off on that. Okay, so then we're moving into this third paragraph here, this big paragraph on Maslow. And this paragraph is quite excellent, like I said before, because you're really having these two sources talk to each other, and it's just showing such a high level of thinking. My biggest suggestion for this paragraph is I would suggest taking it and moving it. And I think I'm in read only, so I can't actually do this on your draft. But I would cut this entire paragraph out, and I would move it all the way to the end, right before this final conclusion paragraph right here. And the reason for that is, and I thought about this for a long time, because your sources are so in communication with each other, you can kind of justify putting things in different places. But what happens is this Maslow section really sort of disrupts the focus that you have set up in the previous paragraph that's going to launch us into a deeper analysis of the charioteer metaphor. And I think that this is such a strong note to leave Jake off on, this idea that he's moving towards self-actualization and that he has a focus. These just seem like really powerful ideas to come at the end of the essay. So I would move it to the second to last paragraph. And then you're just going to have to get rid of this transitional sentence here because it won't make sense to say first anymore. You could just start by saying, where's my suggestion here? Okay. So, like I said, when you move it, you'll need a new transition here. And so I was thinking something like, Jake, to convince you further of Socrates' advice, let's examine another model for happiness and flourishing that was presented by Abraham Maslow. And then that would transition us away from Socrates a little bit into Maslow, instead of wedging Maslow in the middle of the paper here, having him kind of come at the end. And so that's the suggestion I would go with there. Let's see. So then moving into paragraph 4 here, if we were to move this paragraph 3, it wouldn't make sense to have this transition anymore, but you could just eliminate this sentence, and this would make a perfectly fine topic sentence right here. In Socrates' analogy, the charioteer represents reason. So again, that follows up nicely on the heels of this right up here, because you're going to develop that idea further. Okay, so Socrates' idea of reason was the ability to obtain logical thought while contemplating and considering the truth. Okay, so all of this is working well in the 4th paragraph, so I wouldn't suggest making any changes there. In paragraph 5, this is where we move into willpower. And you introduce this idea of the white horse as willpower, and that it's the white horse's job to be in sync with reason, and how if they're not in sync, the black horse, our appetites, will drive the chariot, which means that there's no vision for the destination. In other words, if we cannot keep our willpower in line with our reason, our desires are going to drive us and we will lose sight of the good life. Okay, so that is working well. I would suggest right here that you dig in a little bit deeper. So let's tie this specifically to Jake, okay? So Jake is working at a resort right now. How is his current job feeding into his appetites? What are his surface level desires and appetites that he's getting met all the time in the job that he's working in at the resort? Okay. How does that job at the resort feed into his desires in a way that may be pulling the charioteer off track a little bit? And what would Jake's reason tell him about living an entire life that only attends to a person's appetites? What's going to happen if Jake stays at the resort? What's going to happen to his reason? Is his reason going to suffer? Is he going to feel all the time like I could be doing something more than feeding my appetites? And so how can you take this idea that you lay out so nicely here and dig into Jake's life a little bit right here, okay? And then after you've developed that section, I think it would probably make sense to start a new paragraph right here, because you're about to kind of launch into something that's similar, but also sort of new. It's this experiment with Michelle. And so I think if you set this up as a new paragraph, you could lead in with this idea of, now that you've told Jake a little bit about how appetites are running his life, you could let him know, that he really needs the white horse to step in and he needs to execute his willpower. And that would make sense then in telling us a bit about Michelle, a bit about the children and the marshmallows. And then when you get to the bottom of that, how can you apply that more to Jake's situation? So how is Jake going to need to use willpower when he goes to school? I imagine there will be nights when he's going to wish that he could just go out to the bar and hang out with his friends, but he's going to have a huge nursing exam the next day. And his reason is going to have to pull on his willpower, and his willpower is going to have to keep his appetites in check so that he can stay in and do the right thing and study so that he can meet these kind of long-term happiness goals, right? And so talking to Jake a bit about how he's going to have to execute his willpower the same way that those kids had to sit on their hands during the marshmallow experiment in order for him to get to 2 marshmallows. And in this case, you might consider, what would 2 marshmallows look like for Jake? Maybe that's actually becoming a nurse and flourishing and loving his job. How's he going to get there? What's the role that willpower is going to need to play? So I would suggest folding that into this part right here. Now this paragraph here, paragraph number 6, it's really well written paragraph, but it's mostly sidebar advice to Jake about getting another job on the side and paying for things. And even though it's interesting and well written, it really has very little to do with the philosophical content in the class. So I would suggest, Maggie, cutting this paragraph for the most part and just developing those ideas that we just talked about more in this paragraph above about how the willpower is going to apply specifically to Jake's situation. So I think if you cut this 6th paragraph out, you're not going to lose anything that you would need to get points in the paper, and then developing that other material early on is going to be much more worthwhile for you. Okay, so moving down, paragraph 7 to me looks great, the black horse. And then I would suggest again pulling in paragraph number 8 would be Maslow down here, and then going ahead into your conclusion. Now, one suggestion I'd give you for your conclusion is to give definitive advice. So this sounds kind of a little wishy-washy here, like, Jake, you could go back to school, but you have other choices. Let's just give him a strong piece of advice. I agree with you that going to nursing school is probably not the only path to the good life, but this is the concrete situation that Jake is looking at. He wants to know, should I go to nursing school or not? I think you've done an awesome job and can continue to bring it up to the next level of convincing him that nursing school is the best path. According to the research on willpower and happiness and flourishing and all of those things, self-actualization, nursing school is the right decision. So I think you need to leave him with that strong, convincing point at the end, because if you wrote this whole robust essay, you don't want to let him off the hook at the end by saying, but you could find happiness other ways, Jake. He really wants to hear from you this solid piece of advice. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there, Maggie, and I had written some things down so I can send you these notes as well. It's really just everything that I said in written form. Let me know if you have any questions as you're revising. Keep up the great work. You're really on track here, and look forward to seeing your final draft.